they're worried about letting someone go. And they're like, but they're good people. They're still doing good work. And it's like, but they really aren't doing good work for you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so my answer always is release them to go find the place where they can do the amazing work that they did for you, but is no longer available in your business.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Your team can be your greatest asset or your biggest liability. Tonya here, and I am back with operations expert extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, CEO of Everyday Effectiveness. I think, Gwen, every business owner wants a high-performing team that embraces accountability and drives the organization forward. But I know the question I always hear, and I'm imagining you hear it too, it's how. How do you get that team? How do you make it work? Do you find those people just out on the street already, like out of the box, ready to go? Do you have to train them? If so, what all goes into that? So this is what we're going to be talking about today. And before we go there, I just want to do a really quick recap. So far in the show, we have been unpacking the 5 key operational functions that make up the engine of any business. So far, Gwen, we've covered goals, we've covered effectiveness, we've covered accounting, and now we're entering the exploration of resources, which you have previously defined, if I get this correct, anything that's limited in the business, which typically is money, time, or energy, but also includes people, because there's only so many humans to go around in any given business.
Well, and they have limited time and energy.
Exactly. And we have limited money to pay said people.
Yes.
So what I've heard you say in the past, I've heard you tell clients this, is that people, team members are a business's most expensive and most valuable resource. What I want you to do is expand on that for me.
So they are both things. And they can be both things at the same time, or they can be only one or the other. Sometimes they're only really expensive and they're not actually very valuable. And sometimes they're super, super valuable and they're not actually that expensive. So, but generally they're usually both things at the same time. And the trick is to know that that's okay. And to do it in a way that you're doing it with intention. Mm-hmm. Now, I do say that for most of the people I work with, that's true. If you actually have a physical location, then your people may not be your most expensive thing. Your lease may be, your physical pieces may be, but a lot of the people that we work with are doing, what I'm going to call a virtual based business that doesn't actually have a physical location, doesn't have all of those additional expenses. But even when you do, if you get into larger organizations, still usually their biggest expense is their payroll. The payroll number is one of the largest lines out of all of their accounting piece. And the trick is that creating a return on that investment, right? Mm-hmm. And I would love to say there is just a super simple formula. All you have to do is, and I would be the giantest liar in the whole world. Because it's just not that easy. You've heard me say many, many times, people are problematic. It is the nature of being a people. And it doesn't, and I'm talking about all people. I'm talking about you people. I'm talking about me people.
I was going to say, I'm a problematic people. I know this.
All people are. It's the nature of just being human, because we're independent. We have our own brains. We think about things differently. There's all sorts of things that go along with that, which makes working with people immediately challenging, because they're not in your head. They don't, even if they think like you, they don't think exactly like you, because all of your experiences have not lined up, right along the line. And so that's where the challenge comes in, and finding the right people with the right experiences, with the right attitude, with all of the right thing is
Mm-hmm.
where the challenge is. And it is not simple. I have been in a variety of roles over my career where I've hired lots of people, lots and lots and lots of people. And so I'm relatively good at that process.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that I've nailed it every time, even in this business where I haven't been hiring lots and lots of people. It's been much, much smaller, and it's been less urgent. And, I've had the time and the flexibility, and I still haven't always gotten it right because, well, people, right?
Right.
People is the common denominator. So
So,
when we're looking at this, we have to know that this is not simple. It's never going to be simple.
so that makes me feel better about my past history with people in my own organization. But also, what about the solopreneur? Because I've like right now, I'm running a solopreneur business model. At one point, I had a sizable team for me, still smaller than 5. But when you're looking at making the most of people as a solopreneur, how does that fit in? I mean, does the solopreneur just say, okay, this episode isn't for me? Like, how does that work?
Well, very few solopreneurs aren't interacting with anybody else in any other capacity. Now, they may not have an employee. Technically,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any employees, right?
Right.
I would actually almost call my business a solopreneur business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I work together a lot, but you're an independent contractor. We have a few other people on our team that are independent contractors. So, depending on how you define solopreneur,
Mm-hmm.
I could be considered a solopreneur. So that's the first thing. But even if you're a really, really tiny business and you aren't outsourcing anything
Mm-hmm.
to anybody, you're still probably working with some sort of a vendor with, there are some people that you're interacting with. And so understanding how those interactions are playing, what the value is, are you getting the most value for the money? And this is why I don't call the fourth gear human resources. I call it
Mm-hmm.
resources because it's not just about people, but people are often really involved. It can also be about the technology, but depending on the technology, maybe having to do with people. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of places that it falls in. Will it be as applicable as a solopreneur? Maybe not. It's possible. Maybe not. But if you stay in and you hang in and you listen, I bet there'll be a couple things is like, oh, well, that's actually useful for this other thing, which could be like your husband or your children, because
Well, and
those
that's what
are
I was
also
going to
people that we're
say.
going to deal with.
Right. But, as a solopreneur, what I find is, I have a VA I work with, but a lot of times the people I'm actually managing are the people who live in my house. It's going, okay, I hired a yard service so that gives my husband 2 hours a week into his schedule that he can now do the grocery shopping. And during those 2 hours while he's doing the grocery shopping, I can be focused on my business. So
Yep.
I'm not paying that person out of my business, but yet it all kind of works to feed into my business.
Yep, absolutely. So, human resources always has an effect, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we're always interacting with other people. The relationship can change,
Right.
and how we're using it, and like you said, where they're getting paid, if we're actually paying them, all of those can come into play. But it really is looking at all of those relationships, and sometimes we don't think about what I'm going to call our very part-time relationships. For
Mm-hmm.
example, your accountant, you may only work with your accountant once a
Once a
year,
year. Yeah.
right? But that's still part of that human resources
Mm-hmm.
relationship. It's just not the way we think of it, because we think of them as a vendor. But most vendors, well, actually all vendors, have some sort of a person behind them.
Right. And I know, like, we have an assessment that we have our clients work through, and that we work other individuals through. And when we talk about resources, one of the things we'll talk about, especially when we're talking about people, is whether the entrepreneur feels like they have a high performing accountable team that's driving the business forward. We've talked about before, if they're not driving the business forward, they're likely driving the business backward, or they're the bottleneck preventing growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear you talk a lot about the importance of placing the right people in the right roles. Can you say
So,
more about that?
so the real problem is, and I say problem, I don't know if I mean it problem, but maybe I do. I'm going to stick with problem for the moment, is we tend to think about people and then we think about the job that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And the it's really a backwards way of thinking about what needs to be done. And so what happens is, and I'm just going to pick on you, Tonya, because, you're here and I'm
I'm
talking
here.
to
I'm
you,
easy to
right?
pick on. I fight
Yeah,
back too
exactly.
sometimes, so it
It's an easy
works.
piece. So, I start working with Tonya and Tanya is really good at this other thing. So then Tanya starts doing this thing too. And then
Mm-hmm.
we realize we need this third thing. And Tanya's like, oh, no, I know how to do that. And so she's doing this. And over time, all of a sudden, Tanya has a role, but it's this very weird kind of convoluted role that doesn't necessarily make sense. And the problem then Tanya gets this amazing, situation and she's like, I'm out, peace out. And it's like, oh, we need to replace Tanya. Well, we can't replace Tanya because there is no other Tanya. Tanya is the only Tanya. And then we get really
Tanya is the
frustrated because
unicorn.
because we all are unicorns in that way, right? We're
Right.
all special snowflakes. And so we keep trying to replace Tanya, but there is no other Tanya. And it's because we define the role around Tanya
Mm-hmm.
instead of defining the role and finding the person who fit the role, right? And often what's happened is that the role that is Tanya is actually 4 different roles. It's
Mm-hmm.
4 very part-time roles, but it's 4 very different roles. Now, could you find someone to do it? Possibly. Could you find 2 people to do 2 of them? Way more likely, and that's the issue is we get too focused on the people and what they're good at as opposed to what do we actually need to have done, and what are the skills that we're particularly looking for, and being really clear that when you're doing this, you're doing this role. But when you're doing this other thing, you're doing this very different role. Now, that still may both be Tanya. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding that the next person may not be capable of doing both roles.
So, how do you figure that out? I mean, how do you figure out what tasks or responsibilities are role A versus role B, especially if you're coming from that place of I've been a solopreneur and I'm just hiring, or I've had this tiny team like we do and I'm just starting to scale out and get bigger?
So for me, it's always start with the roles. Pretend like you don't have anybody working for you in any capacity whatsoever. That the only person that exists in the team is you, because since you're the owner, you always get to exist. But
Mm-hmm.
beyond that, assume that nobody else actually has a job, whether they're an employee, a contractor, a vendor. I don't care what kind of job description, that we have with them, and say, what do I need? And when I think about a role, for me, it's what makes sense that these things would go together so that we aren't having to pass things back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, but also where the skills kind of make sense to be together.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about, accounting in the last episode. I'm going to use accounting as a nice example because people are at least vaguely familiar with it. And we often will think of accounting as bookkeeping, accounting, and like a CFO role. These are,
Mm-hmm.
kind of 3 big roles. Now, technically, that could all be one person. You're losing some checks and balances in there
Mm-hmm.
by doing that, but depending on the size of your business, that may not be necessary. Okay, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have checks and balances; you should, but sometimes that just becomes too much of a challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you grow, you may discover that you need more time in a bookkeeping role. Now, does that still need to be the accountant? Well, maybe not. Maybe the accountant you're paying too much for to be doing
Mm-hmm.
the bookkeeping role, right? But could the accountant also be the CFO? Possibly, not always. There's a lot of variables that go in there. I happen to like the finance part of my business. I'm a weirdo, I know it. So I actually do my own bookkeeping, which most people would tell me that is a really, really bad use of my time. But I enjoy it. I'm good at it. It allows me to keep my finger on the numbers and really know what's going on. I do use an accountant for filing my taxes, but I don't use a CFO because I currently don't have a business that it's justified for that, and I have enough of my own financial knowledge to be able to do a reasonable job of CFOing my own business. But I understand that all of those roles are actually separate roles, and for the time being, I fill two of them. Now, at some point, I may not fill those roles,
Right.
And but because I can think of them as a role and not as my job, it's easier for me to think about when would I hand them off to somebody else.
Right. Because that's really where defining the roles and the responsibilities that fall beneath each role or within each role, that's really where it becomes important, is when you're looking to hire help. I mean, oftentimes I see job descriptions, everybody loves to send me job descriptions because I tend to know a lot of people.
You do.
And
it's true.
Blessing curse over here. And I'll see, the label will be virtual assistant, right? VA. And they will want somebody who I call it the kitchen sink job, right?
Yes.
Because first of all, everybody thinks they know what a VA is, and give me 10 VA descriptions and none of them will match. But they'll say they want a VA, and then under there, it will have calendar management, inbox management. Sometimes it'll have appointment setting. So they always love to lump some social media management in there. And sometimes they mean true social media management. They want strategy in addition to creation and coordination. Other times they really just want the coordination piece. And then they want accounts payable, receivable, and blah, and blah, and blah. And so I would love to maybe help a listener out here by figure, like, what are the jobs that go together? Okay, because you can imagine as much as I can that if I'm a solopreneur and I don't have a lot, I feel like I have to throw a bunch of work to a VA to justify their 5-hour a week minimum, for instance, or their 5-hour a month minimum. But how do I keep these things straight? You said, well, look at what goes together. But if all I've been exposed to are job descriptions that are chicken sink style, I'm not necessarily going to know what goes together. Help me out here.
So for me, it's always, if you were writing it as a list of things to do, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, at any point does it make, where do these connect, and do all of these things connect, or are they separate? Right. So using the example you just threw out, right, the idea of inbox management and calendar management probably makes sense together because you're usually using a similar tool. You're using, the Google Suite, or you're using Outlook or something of that nature. It's things that are happening pretty dynamically. It's stuff that probably needs to be addressed at least a little bit every day. You can kind of feel how that goes together. Now, someone may say, oh yeah, but that's social media too. It's like, well, no, because social media can be scheduled ahead of time. And there's nothing really happening in my email and my calendar that is directly tied to social media. Now, maybe I'm having an event that's in my calendar that is tied to social media, sure. But there's no absolute touch point there. And so that would be the thing to say, okay, so the whole social media piece maybe is a separate role, right? And where do those pieces tie together? What are all of the things that we need to have? Question that I'm always asking is, can this be done at any particular time, or does it have to be done in a consistent way at a consistent time? Because social media, I'm going to keep using this as an example. Social media, we have all the tools now. It is easy to do a ton of social media at the beginning of the month, get it all laid out, get it all scheduled out, and not have to touch it again until the beginning of next month. If you planned it and, done all the things, you may need to do a little bit of tweaking, but for the most part, it can be done. It's done at one time, could be done, but it also could be done a little bit every week. There's all sorts of ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know about your inbox, but every inbox I've ever seen needs to be managed at least a little bit most every day.
Right.
Right. And it's dynamic. You don't know what's coming in. You don't know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really plan for it in the traditional sort of way. And so that's a different kind of role where we're doing something with it every day, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily a planned thing where we can't say, oh yeah, in 3 weeks, we need to be talking about this, or I'm expecting this email in 3 weeks. That's
Right.
just not the way email works. Right. So starting to think about, where do things, it's I think it was Sesame Street, one of these things doesn't belong. Remember
Yeah.
back in the day, right? It's kind of that. It's like, as you look at the list to say, do all of these things belong together, or does something feel out of place? Does one of these things, or maybe 2 or 3 of these things, not belong? And then look at those together and say, where do we start seeing the logical groupings? You also can go to plain old corporate America and say, let's look at kind of their big categories and
Mm-hmm.
think about where things lie. The administrative assistant is not the social media person. That's somebody in marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are 2 very separate roles. If you're looking at, big corporation anywhere, social media is not being done by someone's administrative assistant in corporate America. It's being done by someone in marketing, in that marketing department, right? And so you can start also thinking about where those roles fall based on
Mm-hmm.
the type of work it is.
Okay. So another thing that we talked about kind of early on here that I think is important to address is you talk a lot about the importance of having the right people in the right roles.
Yes,
And something else I've heard you say is sometimes being a business owner, especially when you're in a growing business, means that you have to come to terms with the fact that the people who got you here aren't necessarily the people who are going to get you there. All right, so talk to me about that.
Okay. So different people have different skills. We have skill sets of things we learn. We have attitudes and behaviors that are often way more kind of inherent than than skills which can be taught, and all of these things play into whether or not a person is a good fit in a particular role. And most businesses, when we start, really need people who are willing to do a little bit of all sorts of things, but rarely are they exceptionally good at any one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a bit of the whole concept of a jack of all trades, right? I've got more thoughts and feelings on that, but we're not going to go in today. But the general assumption of what jack of all trades means, right? It's not a bad thing. You need someone who can do lots and lots of different things, and there are some people that really appreciate the variety of work that comes with that. I had a virtual assistant a number of years ago. That was part of what she really liked, is that she did a little bit of a whole lot of things.
Right.
But as I discovered I needed more directed work of particular type, she decided that it was probably no longer a good fit for her. And, I applaud her for that, because that's really the right place to say, this role that you need now is no longer one that I actually want. Unfortunately, very few people are as self-aware as she was. And so we keep trying to take our good people, because she was a good person, that she didn't do anything wrong. I didn't have any problems with her in any sort of, technical way, like you would think of letting someone go. But we try to keep finding someplace where they fit. And often as the business changes, there isn't a place that they fit anymore. And because most of the people I work with are people who are really, really caring people, which, I appreciate, and I'm happy. And I love
Right. We like caring
people. They're those people. They're worried about letting someone go. And they're like, but they're good people. They're still doing good work. And it's like, but they really aren't doing good work for you anymore. And so my answer always is, release them to go find the place where they can do the amazing work that they did for you, but is no longer available in your business. And it's tough because you're still
Mhm.
letting someone go, and you feel like I'm letting them down and all of the rest of the things. But keeping people who are not really a good fit means that either other people are compensating, or you're paying more for a role that doesn't need to exist. Or, I mean, I, I've got so many situations that I can talk about where this has happened. And they all look different. Every one of them looks different because it's always a slightly different situation. But it is not uncommon for at least some of your early stage folks to not be able to transition, because part of it is they don't want to transition. They don't want to take on this different type of role or responsibility, or whatever goes along with it. But you also need to know it's not your job to keep them employed.
Right.
Your job is to keep the business healthy.
Oh, that's hard. Right? That's a hard distinction. My job as a business owner isn't to keep other people employed, it's to keep my business healthy.
Right, because then you can keep employing people,
Even if it's not the people I have right now.
even if it's not the people you have right now.
So I'm kind of struggling with the idea of getting from here to there. Like, I get the idea of
Well, you
right people.
should, because it's hard.
Good. Okay, so you're validating the difficulty I'm experiencing right now. So I understand the importance of having the right people in the right roles, both because I want my organization to be healthy, but also because I've only got so much money, people only have so much time, and if they're in the wrong role, then there's gonna be a lot of waste, whether that's wasted time, wasted money, wasted energy, whatever. There's a lot
Tons
of
of
waste.
friction for
Yeah,
you, friction
friction.
for them. All it just everything's harder than it needs to be.
Right. So to get from here to there, how do I tell my people, my person, how do I tell them as the business grows, how do I lay out the expectations I have of them, like my evolving expectations? Because I think that's the other problem we run into. I hired you under a certain business model with certain things. And then as my business grows, I'm expecting different things from you. So, how do I lay out those expectations as they happen? And then in turn, how do I don't want to say hold them accountable, but maybe that's the right terminology. How do I make sure you're meeting my expectations as we go so that I can figure out if you're the right person to get me there?
Yeah. So for me, it's always being as transparent as you can, as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we get further down the road before we realize it's like, oh, wait, this actually has changed. And we didn't tell anybody, not because we were trying to be all secretive. We just didn't notice.
Right.
Right. So as soon as you can. So as soon as you're aware, it's like, oh, I realize now that this job is changing. And, for whatever reason, I've hired, I'll take the bookkeeping kind of example,
Mm-hmm.
right? Instead of you doing the bookkeeping, we're actually hiring an accounting team to do the bookkeeping, because they can interact with each other faster. And in the end, it's actually going to be cheaper. So you're no longer going to be doing the bookkeeping role, Tonya. I know that would disappoint you to no end that you were no longer doing
Greatly.
bookkeeping.
I just cried a tear right there.
Yeah,
No more
right.
bookkeeping
Yeah,
for me.
not. But in doing that, to say, but where we need help is this position. Now, I know this wasn't the position we hired you for, but we think that you're capable of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
We'd love to have you, if you're interested, we'd love to have you start working in this and lay out what the expectations are of. We're going to have a conversation every 2 weeks for the next 8 weeks, so that we see how it's going and make sure that it's making sense. And or somebody say, oh God, I really don't want to do that, and say, okay, we understand that, but that means you no longer have a role here. And just be straightforward about it. It doesn't have to be a big, dramatic thing to say, these are some places where we need your help, and based on your skills and your attitude and all the things, we would love for you to be able to do it. But if you're not happy doing it, then we don't want you here, not because we don't like you, but we don't want you to be unhappy.
Right. We don't want to shove square pegs into round holes.
Exactly.
Okay. So I feel like we've landed in a good place, but I want to recap. I want to give you the opportunity to tell me if I got anything wrong here. But, really the topic is making the most of your people in your organization. And though you oftentimes say, people are a business's most expensive, most valuable resource, the question that oftentimes comes up, especially for the business owner who's on this growth or scale trajectory, is, how do you get the team? And your answer to that seems to be, well, the first thing is making sure you've got the right people in the right roles. And in order to accomplish that, it really comes down to assigning responsibilities to specific roles. And you suggested, look for things that go together. Calendar management, inbox management goes together. Social media stuff goes with marketing, wherever marketing sits, whoever holds the marketing hat in your organization. And then once you've accomplished that, you've gotten your role, your responsibilities that fall under a role, you've got the roles assigned to the right people, even if each individual has multiple roles. Like if you're a solopreneur, you're going to wear all the hats in the organization. Then the next step is really setting clear expectations.
Yep.
Early and often is what you said, right?
Early and often.
And you talked about how when you've got the wrong people in the wrong roles, or you've meshed too many different roles together, that's the friction, right? Which ultimately leads to wasted time, wasted money, wasted energy, all of those things. And then you didn't say this, but kind of what I've drawn out of what you've said is these early, often conversations where those expectations and that accountability just is part of the natural course of how we check in with each other. That then creates that culture of accountability that I think every business owner wants and they don't know how to create. Am I missing anything?
No, you aren't. The thing that occurred to me as you were saying all of this is that we didn't say that I think is also important is we often will get in the habit of hiring a lot of part-time people. And every person that is on the team adds an exponential level of complexity and communication. And so early on, you're going to have a couple of really part-time people, and that's fine. But often we get in the habit of now I've got 14 people all working for me,
2 hours a week.
2 hours a week. Yeah, exactly. And that's another place to be looking as well is do we need to hire a different kind of person at a different level who can take on broader roles instead of narrower roles, so that we simplify communication, because too many people also is a problem.
Right. And thank you for adding that, because I think that is something also that gets lost in translation when we talk about business growth is number of people on nobody at the end of the day wins because they had the most people, right? They win because they're the most effective with the people that they have. So now it's time to turn this over to our listeners and our viewers. And I'm just curious, if you're watching, if you're listening, how you feel about the people in your organization, including yourself. So whatever your thoughts are, good, bad, indifferent, maybe you have more questions than you have answers, I want you to email me. You can find me at Tonya, Tonya, at everydayeffectiveness.com. Tell me your story, and we just might use your story, maybe your problem, to inform a future episode of the show. So until then, we will see you next time. And I just want to say thanks, Gwen. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.